Okay, so in this module, we're going to look at the development of English colonies in the Chesapeake region. This means the British colonies that appeared in the Chesapeake Bay area, what would eventually become Virginia, Maryland, and what's today Washington, D.C. The Sea Dogs and other privateers required bases for their efforts against the Spanish monopoly of New World trade. So, English, French, and Dutch naval forces, settlers, adventurers, and privateers struggled from the late 16th throughout the 17th century to maintain control of key locations in the Caribbean. Islands such as St. Kitts, Nevis, Montserrat, uh, and Antigua became key points in the struggle, with England gaining hold of a few of them. The most important English outposts in the Caribbean became Barbados and Jamaica. Britain established a colony in Barbados in 1625 and Jamaica in 1655. Early on, the British hoped to grow tobacco there, but quickly learned that sugar was the most profitable business available to them. In the ensuing 100 years, sugar went from a rare luxury to a daily necessity. By the late 18th century, Jamaica and Barbados alone generated more commerce than all of Britain's other colonies combined. So, more English immigrants lived on these islands, what were called the Sugar Islands, than in the New England and Chesapeake colonies until well after 1700. The Spanish mostly depopulated the Caribbean of natives, and sugar was very labor intensive and a very dangerous crop, so the English settlers had to use large numbers of slaves. By the 18th century, slaves greatly outnumbered white settlers in the Caribbean, sometimes 8 or 9 to 1. Understanding the harsh nature of their exploitation, there were a lot of slave revolts. On Barbados alone, there were 7 major slave revolts in the first century of settlement. As a result, the plantation owners built their homes as quasi military forts, which goes to show how frequent and dangerous dealing with the slaves in the Caribbean was because they so outnumbered uh, the English colonists. Despite all this profitability, there was obviously limited land available on these small islands. After a few decades of settlement, minorities of elite landowners dominated islands like Barbados. That pushed ambitious settlers who had not gotten in on the ground floor to look elsewhere for places that offered more land and similar cash crop opportunity. The success of sugar meant that English settlers tried to grow it everywhere. They established colonies, but they found that sugar didn't grow all that well outside these tropical Caribbean areas. The Roanoke failures had frustrated Queen Elizabeth, so she refused to sink any more royal treasure into what she was sure would be a failing enterprise. Elizabeth ruled for more than 4 decades, dying in 1603. She left no heir, so the next in line to the throne actually came from her competitors, the Stuart family from Scotland. James I was the great grandson of Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's elder half sister, and the daughter of Henry VII. James had a different idea than Elizabeth of how England should be run. He was the first to conceive of the English nation as Great Britain. He pushed for the unity of the Scottish and English kingdoms. He was very well educated, but he was also arrogant, boorish, lazy, and not to mention very profligate and an active bisexual. So there's a lot of criticism during his reign of his personal life. He commissioned a new standard translation of the Bible by the greatest scholars available to him, which became known of as the King James Version of the Bible. This was done to resolve issues and differences regarding the various translations in use. James did not like Puritans. Elizabeth had tolerated the Puritans and allowed them to prosper. James wanted the Puritans put in their place. So James wanted to reduce Puritan influence over English Christianity. That's part of what the King James Version of the Bible was for. The King James Version of the Bible reflects translations that indicate this kind of political activity against the Puritans. In particular, certain Greek words were retranslated to emphasize authority in church hierarchy. For example, changing the word congregation to church, or changing the phrase "they were not disobedient" to "they were obedient." To us, those semantic changes don't mean a whole lot, but at the time, they had profound meanings for how the church in England ran. So James also started to target Puritans within England politically. He barred Puritans from serving in high offices in his government, reduced their political power, and tried his best overall to reduce their religious influence. Again, King James Bible was part of that. Furthermore, James had a different attitude than Elizabeth on New World colonization. He was eager to restart England's attempts to gain a share of the New World windfall profits. James was not interested, however, in repeating the Roanoke failures. He wanted to risk royal money minimally. So England was in £400,000 of debt due to the Irish Wars when James took over, so he wanted his cake and to eat it too with regard to New World settlement. He did not want to waste royal treasury money on it. So what James encouraged were private investments. The Virginia Company was one of a new class of private entrepreneurial enterprises called joint stock companies. These were profit-seeking corporations that solicited investors with the promise of good returns, kind of old versions of what we think of as publicly traded companies, more simplistic than that. Some of the same principles are at work. These companies were chartered and legitimized by the king and given an explicit religious mission to bring the Christian religion to the Indians, according to the Virginia Company's charter. Still, the profit motive was what was behind the Virginia Company's activities. Investors in the company saw the opportunities available in the New World to be gold, other minerals. Following that, commodities such as wine, citrus, olive oil, forest products like pitch, tar, potash, lumber, and other materials needed by the Navy. Trade with the Indians was also a motive. So the Virginia Company was a for-profit enterprise with the following business plan, in order of priority. 1. Find gold, silver, and other minerals. 2. Exploit the natural resources available in the area. 3. Develop cash crop economics. 4. Trade with Indians for products. 5. Provide a release valve for England's growing population. Perhaps some of those urban poor that are crowding the cities like London could go work in the New World. Maybe this was a place you could get rid of them. 6. Convert the natives to Christianity. All of this should be done in the name of the king. You can see here the seal of the Virginia Company has the image of King James on it. However, very little of the king's money should be at risk. So, again, this was a private business venture, not all that different from a startup, like you would think of an internet startup today. All focused on one thing, and that was making a ton of money as quickly as possible.